What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Tiny Tyler, and in today's video we are talking House of the Dragon Season 3 Episode 4. Spoiler warning ahead if you have not watched the most recent video. It aired last night at the time of recording. Also, slight spoiler, I do this in all my videos. I discuss some of my points and whatnot based off of the book Fire and Blood. I've read it a few times, and so there will be spoilers there too if you don't want to even know even a little bit of what could possibly potentially even happen. So spoiler warning ahead, you have been warned. Clicked off now if you don't want to know what happened in episode 4 or what could possibly happen based off of Fire and Blood. In today's video, I want to talk about this dynamic that they seem to be creating between Rhaenyra and Ormund Hightower, even though they're not in the same room. I want to talk about Aegon's journey and what's going on with Sunfyre. I think this is really interesting. Rhaenyra and Alicent is another thing I want to talk about today. Like this relationship that they're continuing to emphasize in the show. Fucking fascinating. We'll get into that. Daemon and Rhaena. Daemon coming across Rhaena again. I think this is really interesting. There could be a lot of small setup there and some questions to explore. Dareon and Tessarion. I love what they're building there, and we'll talk about that. Helaena, can we just talk about that? What the fuck? She's preggers? I mean,
oh my.
Not gonna get too into that, but we're not just yet. We are gonna talk about it today. Daemon and Caraxes, love the relationship dynamic they're creating there, or they're showing us there. I'm sorry. We're gonna talk about that. And then what happened at the back end when Rhaenyra said she wanted to give coin to the small folk, and then they go around kind of terrorizing the small folk over the Queen of the Bastards graffiti, if you will, and then a slight prediction I have at the end. So with that all out of the way, that's what we're going to be covering in today's video. Let's get fucking into it. Rhaenyra and Ormund Hightower. I love this dynamic they're creating here because it's like they're showing parallel. Like they're the opposing side of the same coin, and they're showing us that kind of going flip-flopping back and forth between what Ormund is doing as a leader and what Rhaenyra is doing as a queen. They're showing us they almost represent modern politics. You know, you have the more progressive approach with Rhaenyra. I mean, she's a queen. And then you have the more conservative, old school, by the books approach with Ormund Hightower. And so they're opposite ends of the spectrum in that regard. But what they seem to be doing in how they're showing us each individual's journey and role as a leader is they're also showing us that there's a similarity in what they're both experiencing at this aspect in the war. And that is they're both ruling in a rather isolated position. And I don't mean isolated in there's nobody around them. I mean, what we see with Rhaenyra is she's alone so much of the time in this episode, a lot more than usual. She may be around people, but the feeling is that she's alone. She looks tired and exhausted. She doesn't really know who to trust. So she's trying to make these decisions all on her own. People are like, the sea snake kind of leaves her, he leaves her. Daemon's not around, and she hasn't even heard from him. And she asks about, has Daemon sent a raven? He hasn't. And so with her, it feels like she's feeling more alone. With Ormund, he is choosing to. I mean, he's got that angry outburst towards the back end of the episode. And so while Dareon, his ward, is there, he's not really looking to other people to help him make decisions. He already knows what he's going to do. He's leading in an isolated fashion, and everybody's looking directly to him. It's not like it's him and 3 other people that his soldiers are looking to. It's just him. And I find that to be fascinating because, again, there's a dynamic, there's a tension between those two that hasn't been really explored in face-to-face yet. But how they're showing us each of their journeys at this section of the war is interesting because, again, 2 sides of the same coin, but there's also a similarity right down the middle of they're both rather isolated and alone in their decision-making processes, and I find that fascinating. Moving on to the next point, like I said, I want to talk about Aegon's journey and Sunfyre. Now, this whole sequence from when Aegon finds Sunfyre, then they go to Rook's Rest, was so fucking awesome. It was so fucking awesome. I really loved this because we really got to see what the small folk are doing, what the aftermath of the big battles are, what the real implications are of dragons entering the war. And I really loved that whole sequence of events that we saw because, I mean, seeing Melee's headless, a rotting corpse on top of the castle at Rook's Rest was so fucking cool. Seeing everybody struggle, not being able to find food or money, having to look to these authoritarian leaders, like I forget the guy's name already, that Aegon is quarreling with at Rook's Rest. But that type of person, they're looking to these type of men to step up in a sense and take control because there's just chaos and pandemonium around and nobody else is willing to do so. And I love that. And I love seeing Aegon experience that first fucking hand when he's been in the Red Keep his whole life. Everything's been handed to him and now he has to struggle. And you see that battle that he has to face where he wants to be his normal kingly royal self and just be like, no, motherfucker, this is how it's going to be. But he doesn't have that kind of power and control anymore. It doesn't work. He can't just run his mouth. The other thing is Sunfyre, right? Sunfyre being dead. Emphasize on the quotes around the word dead. They're hinting at Sunfyre being alive with Aegon saying Sunfire's dead. And I love this too. And this is going to be another theme that we're going to come back to throughout the video today. I love this because they're actually starting to hint at some of the bonds between Dragon and Rider more. And again, that'll be like an undertone to some of the other things I talk about today. They're really starting to hint at the real bonds between Dragon and Rider that can exist, but we haven't seen that much of it yet because like with Vhagar and Aemond, like Vhagar lets Aemond ride her, but it never feels like they actually have a bond. And there's been, I think, 2 or 3 times where Vhagar doesn't actually listen to Aemond. And then even when he showed up at Harrenhal towards what was at the back end of episode 3, Vhagar doesn't even come to Aemond's side when they're taking the castle and he's getting fucked up. So underneath that, it feels like they're starting to kind of come back to the fact that there can be a true bond between Dragon and Rider. We probably won't see that as much with the Dragon Seeds, but we're starting to see it with Sunfyre and Aegon. So I'm really curious to see how they do that. I will admit, I think I was wrong because I thought we were going to go to Rook's Rest and we were going to somehow Sunfyre and Aegon were going to reunite and Sunfyre was already going to be like moving around alive. In the books, Sunfyre has a big role to play down the road. So assuming they keep Sunfyre alive, which I definitely still lean towards, I'm wondering how they do it now. Without getting too into it, Sunfyre and Aegon reunite at Dragonstone towards the back end of the dance, and curious if they're still going to do that. Moving on, though, the next point I want to talk about is Rhaenyra and Alicent. Now, this relationship continues to fascinate me. I think it's not in the books at all, which is why I find myself questioning it. I think it's cool, but I question it a lot. Like, what the fuck are they doing with this? Because even in the books, Alicent's older than Rhaenyra. They are not the same age, and they never get along. But they keep coming back to the fact that they keep hinting at Rhaenyra and Alicent's friendship is kind of, it triumphs amongst the chaos of this war. It continues to. They continue to trust one another. And I find this absolutely fascinating. I do love it. I think it adds like a sense of warmth. Maybe warmth's a strong word, but it adds something like a warmth to all of the tension in this war. It almost like provides a sense of hope, because they can still remain friends even after the backstabbings and betrayals. And my biggest question here is, what fucking purpose does this relationship serve at the back end of the dance, like in the events to come? I'd love to hear from you. I really can't think of anything yet, but if you have any thoughts, drop them down below. The next point I want to get to here is Daemon and Rhaena. This is cool. This is something I talked about in a few videos. I had a feeling Daemon was going, especially when Rhaenyra sent him to the Vale, I had a feeling he was going to be the one to come across Rhaena. And part of my reasoning for this was because Daemon and the original Dragon Rider of Sheepstealer, Nettles, had a relationship in the book. And eventually, Daemon sends Nettles to Essos. Now, I did say I thought when Daemon came across Rhaena, he would send her away. And I still do think that Rhaena is going to go to Essos at some point, and she's just going to be like the placeholder for Nettles. I'm just curious now how that's going to happen now. I'm getting a feeling that Rhaena still has a role to play in this, and I almost wonder if she's going to come to blows with Rhaenyra for what her role in Chase's death. That's going to be fucking interesting. So like my biggest question here, and again, would love to hear from you. I'll drop a comment down below if you have any thoughts or theories on this, is like, what is Rhaena's role going to play? What is Rhaena's role going to be moving forward? I don't just think it's just like a subplot going on over here. I think she's going to come to blows with Rhaenyra again. But outside of that, I can't really think of much. Next up, Dareon and Tessarion. Now, this is where we're going to come back to what this episode seems to be showing us more, and that is the bond between Dragon and Dragon Rider, like a true bond when they actually get one another. Because I feel like we're seeing that with Tessarion and Dareon. You know, everything Dareon does when he ends up killing, I can't even remember the guy's name. Wow, that happened so fast. Hugh Hammer's wife's brother when Dareon kills him because Ormund tells him to. This was an interesting scene. I love that they're showing an actual tight-knit relationship between dragon and rider here. It really seems like Tessarion has Daeron's back. It seems like there's a real love there, a real bond between the two. And it almost seems like Tessarion, not almost, it seems like Tessarion sees Ormund as a threat. And this makes sense to me because it seems like Ormund actually is having Dareon do things that are against the type of character he is, the type of person he is in his heart. And it's almost like Tessarion senses that, and she feels the threat that Ormund is to Dareon. And this is really interesting. I almost wonder if something else is going to come of that, because in the book, Ormund, if I recall correctly, Ormund never even offers the notion to Dareon that he's the next king. And that's interesting. That's an interesting little plot twist, if you will. Plot twist away from the book is what I mean there. But again, I love what they're doing with Daemon and Dareon, and Tessarion is like, I just think it's such a cool dragon design too. I had a friend tell me or ask me earlier this week what my favorite dragon was, and I have a few that I really like. Caraxes is cool as shit. I really like Syrax too, but I don't know. I'm still gonna hold my opinion. I'm gonna reserve my opinion a little bit more till we see Tessarion in action. But I'm almost leaning toward Tessarion. I'd love to hear from you all, though. If you have a favorite dragon already, drop it in the comments down below. And I'm going to use this to naturally pivot into Daemon and Caraxes, because the whole scene before Daemon finds Rhaena is interesting, where he's having this little quarrel with Caraxes. And it's almost like Caraxes is like, we have to go over here. Showing Daemon the thing that he needs to see that he doesn't know he needs to see yet. And it's almost like they're having like a lover's quarrel is what it feels like. I mean, Daemon's trying to wrestle for control, and Caraxes is like, no, motherfucker. And the looks Daemon was giving Caraxes were so funny. Like, it's almost like disgust and disappointment. And I'm just thinking to myself, man, Caraxes could fry you alive right now. It was awesome. It really started to show the bond between rider and dragon really well, because even when they come across Rhaena and Sheepstealer, Caraxes wasn't engaging in battle right away. Caraxes was listening to Daemon to calm down and wait for a moment and obey. I think it's calm and obey are the words they were saying in High Valyrian. So that was really cool. Like, the theme in this episode really, there's like maybe not the main theme, but one of the underlying themes of this episode seemed to be that, like, there are real bonds between dragon and riders where the dragons actually listen to their riders. I mean, so far we've seen Sheepstealer not listening to anything to Rhaena said, naturally so. Vhagar not listening to Aemond, and even, I'm drawing a blank, Luke's dragon when he died in like season 1 wasn't listening to him either. So yeah. Now let's talk about Helaena. Like, talk about a what the fuck moment. I did not see that coming. And it's just like, who impregnated her?
Look at me right now as you say that. Look at you.
I'm
Look
just
at your
pointing at
finger.
your point.
Look at pointing.
You haven't seen
You're
pointing
accusing
until I
me
get
of
through with you,
pointing
and then
while
you'll
you're...
know.
I would love to hear from you if you have thoughts and theories on this one. Who do you think it is? In the book, she has a third son. And because this is television, they need more drama. I'm almost thinking they're going to make this the third son, and this one's actually going to be Aemond. Aemond, maybe he forced himself on her against her will, whatever it is. I have a feel, because she hasn't seen Aegon in a while. Last time she did, he was hurt and in bed, and obviously she's not that far along. So I want to say it's Aemond's kid, and I think it's going to be they're probably going to name it the third son from the book, which was, it wasn't Maegor, but it was something like that. Anyway, I digress on that point. That's what I'm thinking. I think it's going to be Aemond's kid. And they're just going to do that to really spice things the fuck up. Because now it's just like, it makes it even more confusing. Okay, it's Rhaenyra versus Aegon. Greens versus black. But if we remove Rhaenyra, who's actually the king? Because now you have a potential son that Helena's pregnant with, because she's the queen. And they could pass that off as Aegon II's kid. Or is it Dareon, because he's Aegon's brother? Or is it Aemond? You know, because you got Ormund fighting for Dareon now. Aemond's, for all intents and purposes, considered AWOL, and it just creates more, like, confusion. Like, more drama. Like, who's actually the next in succession? So, that's my thoughts. Those are my feelings on it. Drop your comments down below. What do you think? And then last but not least, and I think this really sets up the next episode and in an interesting way, because it's like, what are the implications here? When Rhaenyra decides to give the small folk the coin.
Where is my gold? Your gold?
From the Lady of the Vale, Lady Arryn from the Vale, and goes against what Daemon states when he says you should give it to the gold cloaks. This is interesting because her act of giving the small folk that coin could really be something that it works in her favor, where the small folk have her back. They really support her as the queen. But on the other hand, now the gold cloaks are going around essentially terrorizing the city, trying to figure out who wrote that on the wall, who's writing those messages on the wall, Queen of Bastards. And now it begs the question, what message is that really going to send to the small folk? And what I'm starting to think is it's actually going to send a really confusing message, and more of them are going to turn on her, which is going to set up when the small folk storm the dragon pits and take out the remaining dragons in King's Landing. That's what I'm thinking right now. But it also begs a question, like, what are Daemon's motives here? Because there's a part of me saying that, like, Daemon is the one behind the Gold Cloak's aggressiveness in finding out who wrote Queen of Bastards. But at the same time, Rhaenyra did say, figure out who did it and take care of it. She wasn't explicit on how to handle it. So that's where I'm at with that. It's interesting. But my biggest prediction here, because just to kind of stay with Daemon for a moment there, my biggest prediction is in the books, it always kind of like Daemon always seems like he's always torn in two different directions. There's obviously the depiction of him being very self-centered and selfish, but with his visions in Harrenhal in season 2, he has more of like a devoted husband type of vibe going on there. And I feel like, with the exception of him lying about Rhaena to keep her safe as a father, you know, the show is setting him up, in my personal opinion, to really come across as, again, a devoted husband, a loyal servant to the crown. And I feel like it's going to stay that way. I think he's going to die supporting Rhaenyra to the fucking end, with no question from the viewer standpoint. Obviously, Rhaenyra is going to question some of the things he does, but from the viewer standpoint, I don't think we're going to have a question of like where his loyalties lied at the end. And I find this interesting. So anyway, that's it. That's all. Those are my thoughts. Those are like the big standout moments. I would love to hear what you guys think down below about Rhaena's role going forward. What purpose does Alicent and Rhaenyra's friendship actually serve? What are Daemon's motives, and who do you think impregnated Helaena? I don't think they stated that Helaena was pregnant, but I think it's pretty much implied at this point. So that's it. That's all, y'all. Drop your comments down below, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.